Welcome to the Mold Matters Podcast. Whether you are looking for help recovering from mold illness or just want to learn more about creating a safe environment for your family, this podcast is the place for you.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Mold Matters Podcast. This is a podcast, as you heard in the introductory message, that's dedicated to health, to mold, and we've combined our experience as well as the experience of many others who we consult with, which includes doctors, microbiologists, and Mr. Google sometimes.
Mr. Google's actually...
He's okay.
He's a little inconsistent.
He is actually.
Yeah. He's a good guy, don't get me wrong. He's a good guy. But
scientific journals. In fact, part of our podcast today comes from some scientific journals and experts in the field.
And, other remediators.
Remediators. So... And just experience in general. But anyways, my name's Jeremy, and we've got Mike Adams, a professional remediator for many years.
Tiny adjust. Okay.
Yeah, just adjust a few settings.
Yeah.
So we've got a nice podcast for you. This topic, outdoor air versus indoor air, is something we've talked about doing a podcast for a while, and it's something that comes up all the time, every day.
Yeah.
And we thought we actually brought it up in one of the podcasts. I don't know if you remember when we were talking about indoor sampling. We brought up indoor versus outdoor air briefly. Mm-hmm. But I think today, by way of introduction, today is more... We're going to go a little more in depth on what outdoor versus indoor looks like. And... kind of, I guess actually, would you share, Mike? Because early on in your career, you started to realize, without reading any of the literature, to realize outdoor air isn't the best indicator always of what's going on in the home. Do you remember how that happened?
Yeah, I do. I definitely do. In fact, there were, I would try to get as much information as I could back then. I mean, we're talking 15 years ago. Anyway, I just, through reading as much as I could and then just thinking about the dynamics of what we're actually trying to achieve by taking these tests, I realized that, man, there is a lot of misinformation out there. And I'll give you an example. I did watch a video from a guy, and the title of the video, now this guy doesn't know what he's talking about. Let me preface that with that. But he was trying to make the point of, you can't tell if your house is healthy or not because if you just dumped off some, I think it was soil additive or mulch or something, into your garden by your front door, you've all of a sudden raised your mold count by 100 times, right?
Inside the house?
No, he was saying outside the house.
Okay.
That was the problem with his logic. He was saying, so whoever's spreading this has been exposed to thousands and thousands and thousands of spores. You don't get sick when you spread mulch. So obviously the whole mold thing is a hoax. And it was a really kind of a dumb video.
Yeah.
But it did make me think, the thing that he is right about is the outdoor conditions can vary wildly.
Yes.
With whatever is going on in the yard or in the the parking lot or wherever you're taking an outdoor test.
Yes.
And so we're going to talk about some of those things that can really mess with an outdoor test, and then overall, does an outdoor test even mean anything?
Yeah. And actually, maybe we should start out with what some people refer to as the golden rule of mold testing. And this actually comes from the Air Quality, the American Conference of Governmental Industrial Hygienists. This is kind of how they define the golden rule of air quality, which we're not the only ones that dispute it, but I think the world's coming around to understanding that outdoor and indoor air have to be looked at differently. But here's the golden rule.
Well, let me also throw in, I think traditional remediators, when they do not do a great job of remediation, they'll rely on that golden rule, and hopefully they're crossing their fingers they get a really, really, really moldy outdoor report so that they can fly in underneath that count and say, yep, your house is safe.
Yeah, so I agree with that. So here's the golden rule. The concentration of fungi in indoor air typically is similar to or lower than the concentration seen outdoors.
Hang on. Just one second. fungi or fungi?
I don't know.
Because the joke doesn't work
If you say fungi.
if you say fungi.
Yeah,
So
I'll
I would like to see a grassroots movement.
Okay, fungi.
To go fungi.
I'll do that for you.
All right, thanks. Sorry, start over.
The concentration of fungi in indoor air typically is similar to or lower than the concentrations seen outdoors. Exceptions are enclosed agricultural and other specialized environments where indoor fungal concentrations may be much higher. Outdoor concentrations may exceed those measured indoors, even where indoor fungal growth is obvious. If indoor fungal concentrations are very high, indoor/outdoor concentration ratios for total fungi may be low, even in the presence of significant indoor growth. I mean, so that's kind of, there is some things in here that I think that are valid, but on the other hand, outdoor fungal concentrations may be reduced during times of snow cover or other conditions that suppress the release of fungal spores from outdoor sources, at which times indoor measurements may be higher than those outdoors, even in the absence of significant indoor sources. So it does kind of, it kind of says, yes, let's use outdoor air as a baseline. It does make room for some exceptions.
Yeah.
But I think if you, I'm thinking of just very recent examples in your career, Mike, where people are, you got multiple parties coming in to analyze samples, and the outdoor air becomes the Bible all of a sudden.
Right.
And it's like, wait, but what's the outdoor?
Yeah, and in the one case I think that you're referring to was a fairly high-profile case in the Louisiana area.
Yeah.
The outdoor test came in at crazy low amounts.
Mm-hmm.
And then they held the remediation process, again, the results of the remediation process against those abnormally low outside counts, and we're trying to make a decision whether the place was inhabitable or not.
Yeah.
And so, you just have to be really careful because those outdoor counts can vary dramatically.
Yeah. And I just like anything with mold, it's never simple. It would be nice if it was a simple. I mean, I'd love to take an air sample and then just have a chart that I went down and said, okay, here's the okay, yeah,
it'd be great.
We're right. That house is safe. There's nothing else I need to think about.
Yeah.
But really, you have to be in everything mold. You have to be a major investigator. You have to be a detective. Unfortunately, so a couple factors, I guess. Let's dive into temperature as a first factor. Basically, what we want to do is we want to say, how is an indoor environment, how is your home, for example, going to be different environmentally than outdoors?
Yeah.
And a big one is temperature.
Right.
So I don't know if you want to mention some things about temperature.
Yeah, so studies have shown, and I think it's anything below 50 degrees. Is that, am I quoting that right?
Yeah.
Anyway, if it's cooler outside. If it's cooler outside, then you are not going to have as many molds sporing. They kind of just go into a little bit of a dormancy, and they're not going to spore.
Yeah.
So, for example, if you go outside in the dead of winter and take a test at 26 degrees outside, that test is likely going to be pretty darn clean.
Yeah.
And so don't let that panic you if you go in and take an indoor test and you have higher counts than outdoor. It's just the nature of the beast. It's not going to spore very much when the weather is cold outside.
Right. Yeah, I mean, there's the snow argument makes sense, right? If there's snow everywhere, you have a fresh... But you're kind of saying even cold, regardless of snow.
Yeah.
In fact, I pulled up the numbers while you were doing it. There's there's a range, right? So anything actually, the optimal range for most mold, and I guess that's something to bring up too, is some molds are different.
Right.
Some molds are a little better at hotter temperatures, some are better at cooler. But for most molds, the optimal range is 59 degrees to 86 degrees.
Okay.
So, and then you can kind of go out from there. Below 50 is where you start to lose a lot of activity with mold.
Yeah.
So yeah, I mean, you're at 45 degrees. You're taking, and then you use that outdoor test as your Bible to say this is what we need to hold the indoor air to. And then on the reverse end, hot temperatures. I think the literature says you start to hit 99, 100 degrees, and that's where a lot of molds, they can live up to 140 degrees, some of them, but
Yeah.
that's where you start to have, I imagine a bell curve. At the low
Right.
temperatures, not as much activity. Up to like 75 degrees is the peak.
Yeah.
Back down by 100 degrees, you start losing a lot of the
Yeah.
molds that are active.
And by contrast, your indoor air is probably always between 68 and 76 degrees
Right.
for the most part. So the indoor is ideal to spore if the mold is available.
Yeah, exactly. So that's, I remember an environmental scientist saying, depending on where you live, 6 months of the year,
Yeah.
you've got some major temperature issues that make your indoor air sample comparisons really not that great.
Yeah.
Especially where we live here in Utah, we have kind of the extreme season. So we're in the 40s today.
Right.
So we're already hitting that
Yeah.
season. We'll have the next 3 or 4 months of pretty cold weather that's below 50. When it gets hotter, I guess the difference between the extremes, when it's hotter, it does heat in its extremes can actually kill the mold, whereas cool in its extremes typically just puts it, like you said, into a dormant phase. So,
Right.
So that's kind of the temperature issue.
The next one up was the humidity.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Let's talk about humidity. Maybe introduce that for us.
So yeah, this is a really interesting subject to me because, as you know, Jeremy, with our method of remediation, we use a vapor, which raises the humidity in the home to actually sterilize or kill the mold and bacteria, everything that's in the home.
Mm-hmm.
We've been accused by competitors as, well, what they're doing is they're just humidifying the home, and that weighs down the spores, and that makes it so you can get a good after treatment test, which is just, it's nonsense. For one thing, we would not have literally thousands and thousands of happy customers who swear by our service if that was the case.
Many of whom were sick and
Many are very
now
sick,
feel
yeah.
better. So
And so, but my point is that humidity does not make mold lower, it makes mold much greater.
yeah.
And that's obviously the case. In fact, that's the same project that I'd been working on down in Louisiana. They didn't necessarily have a flood situation. They had a what they call a mold bloom, and that's because they had mold on many of the surfaces already. And then when the power went out from the storm, they lost their HVAC system. Once you lose your HVAC system, you have no air movement. And so your air becomes stagnant, and it also, the humidity just starts to build.
Mm-hmm.
And that's what created what we call the mold bloom, to where it was almost literally mold on every surface in that facility.
Wow.
And so, yeah, humidity is a huge factor when it comes to mold.
Yeah. So what you're saying is, outdoors, especially in Louisiana, the South, and we're speaking relative humidity. So even cool places can have high relative humidities, but you've got humidity, which mold really likes because it provides the moisture,
Right.
and then if it has the moisture, all it needs is nutrition, which is easy to find. So if you're taking an outdoor sample in a very humid environment outside the home, and then you take a sample inside the home where you regulate the humidity, right?
Right.
You regulate the temperature, like you said,
Yeah.
and you regulate the humidity with your air conditioners or your dehumidifiers on your air conditioners or whatever it is, and airflow,
Yeah.
to create a different environment from a humidity perspective.
So you truly are. I guess that's the point of this whole podcast. Is it's almost apples and oranges.
It's not apples to apples, unfortunately.
Yeah.
It's a good
It's not,
game, but
yeah, apples to apples is a great game.
and it is a
Yeah.
good game. Unfortunately, that's not
No,
air sampling.
no,
but-
it's right. But yeah, the in more humid states, the outdoor counts are astronomically higher than what we would have here in Utah, for
Mhm.
example.
yeah.
And so, again, if you're comparing the outdoor to what the to the indoor count, it's going to really skew the results and skew your thinking on the whole subject matter. And
Mhm.
also, you would want to think that a home in Mississippi is every bit as healthy as a home in Utah.
Right.
But if you go by, if we're just comparing outdoor to indoor, that's really going to skew that by a bunch.
Yeah. Yeah, because I think on the scale, Utah, where we live, outdoor counts are much lower than they are in Florida or Georgia or South Carolina.
I think I talked to a remediator in central Illinois, and I think he told me that a typical outdoor count is 5,000-6,000 minimum.
Really?
During the summer, yeah.
Yeah, that's much higher than Utah.
Much higher, yeah.
And they can go up to, I've seen, up to 20,000 or more, depending on the weather. That kind of goes back to the, because climate and even weather conditions do influence, the air counts. Rain is the common one. If you've got rain, wind, for example, wind definitely will pick up spores, and it's not like you typically have fans in your house blowing stuff around.
30 miles an hour, yeah.
Yeah, so you've got wind. Rain has an interesting effect. It definitely, if you take a test after a rainstorm, I've seen some pretty high accounts just in Utah. Yeah. We don't get a ton of rain, so it's not as big of a thing. But
I will say this. I took a test once on the banks of the Potomac River, and that had to have been 50-mile-an-hour winds. Mm-hmm. And you would think that should stir things up like crazy. That test came back completely clean.
Really?
Did not capture a spore. Yeah.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Do you think it's because there were no spores, or do you think it's because the air pump couldn't handle it? Or
I think.
You think it was just a clean air environment because there was?
No, I don't think it was a clean air environment at all. I think it was just the wind and the interaction with the wind and the pump, how that pump is pulling.
Yeah.
Almost a reverse Venturi effect.
Yeah.
But it didn't pick up a thing, which I actually tried to point it right into the wind, thinking this is really going to read sky high.
If you're going right in.
And absolutely nothing.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Interesting. Yeah, and this is actually a good lead into maybe the last point we want to talk about, which is indoor environments are by definition indoors.
Yes, they are. Yes, I have yet to see. Well, maybe I should. That's right. I have yet to see an indoor environment outdoors.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, please give us
Chime
feedback.
Chime in if you have. Yeah.
Call in the hotline if you. Yeah. So
is that Ashley? Do we have a hotline they could call?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Let's see if our
we'll get that out later. Yeah.
If we get any calls, tap them into the podcast. Yeah. I mean, an indoor space is an enclosed space.
Yeah.
It is enclosed from the environment. So if you, and an outdoor space has all these factors, and there's many more that maybe we don't even know about or we haven't had the time to bring up in the outdoor environment. But indoors, you are in a confined space. We try our best to get air circulation, and people do open doors and windows, but by and large, it's a very, compared to the outdoors, it's not, it doesn't have a ton of fresh flowing air that, it has a lot of recycled air and a lot of...
So I think the point you're aiming at is that even if you are at the same amount outside as you are inside, or inside as you are outside, that doesn't even mean you're healthy on the inside. And the reason for that is, go ahead and share your analogy. I think it's great.
The lawnmower?
Yeah.
Well, should I give the background?
Yeah.
Well, it started with me. I was going for a jog here not far away, and I was at a very busy intersection. I started to smell some exhaust because there were a ton of cars, and I was on the sidewalk. And I started to smell exhaust, and while you're running, you're like, oh, yeah. It's not my favorite thing to breathe exhaust, but it actually it wasn't that bad.
Yeah.
And, tons of cars at this one stoplight intersection. And it got me thinking, I could totally handle that exhaust, no problem. I mean, I didn't love it because I was right there, but it was totally fine. And I kind of just the wheels started turning in my mind, and I was like, well, what if we took that same kind of a thing, even exhaust, and put it into our house even for 3 minutes?
Yeah.
So I first went to a car, and I'm like, oh, yeah, I mean, people kill themselves with cars, they put it in the garage and turn on the exhaust, and it doesn't take long. And then it took me to I think the better example, which is lawn mowing. We all mow lawns.
Yeah.
And we'll we'll whiff the exhaust as we're mowing, but
I actually quite enjoy that smell.
do you?
Yeah, I kind of do. Yeah.
Mixed in.
Actually, I like to mow the lawn. That's so anyway.
Oh,
yeah.
mixed in with the grass smell, the fresh
great,
grass
yeah.
smell. I do like
Great.
mowing.
Yeah.
Now, take that lawnmower.
Yeah.
How long does it take you to mow?
Oh,
Your
an
lawn?
hour.
An hour?
Yeah.
Take that same lawnmower, stick it in your house for 5 minutes,
Right.
and just imagine the effect that has on your environment indoors.
Yeah. And also change the dynamic from I only mow the lawn an hour a week to I actually sleep in that house 10 hours a day.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I think the point is that equal amounts of mold outside and inside can be drastically different environments that you're in.
Yes.
Yeah.
Totally. And for the most part, I mean, I have to be careful because haven't been in every environment, but for the most part, I like to see the indoor air cleaner than the outdoor air.
Right. Yeah.
But, again, there's this idea of, I've been in houses that had pretty clean air tests, but I didn't feel like they were healthy environments.
Right.
So you run the risk of that as well.
Well, the other problem, I'll just throw this in real quick. The other problem is, and we mentioned this on former podcasts, but when you take a air quality test through just a spore trap cassette,
Mm-hmm.
You're measuring for the mold that is currently sporing at that time.
Mm-hmm.
You're not accounting for mold that could be dormant in the home. You're not accounting for mold that is growing and happy in the home and not sporing. You're just accounting for the mold that happens to be sporing somewhere around where you took the test.
Mm-hmm.
And so it can really throw you. I have been in homes where I can see the mold literally growing on the bathroom walls and the bathroom ceiling. I've taken a test in the bathroom itself, and it came back clean.
Mm-hmm.
So it's all of it is just take it with a grain of salt. It's a tool, but it is not a definitive measure of anything.
Yeah. Well, and I'd throw in that list mycotoxins. They, we're still learning about them, but they are emitted into the environment under different conditions than spores are emitted into the environment.
Right.
So I remember a house you and I went to several months ago where we felt really sick.
Yeah.
And I took some air tests there. They didn't have crazy high air tests in
Yeah.
there. But
Yeah.
you and I came out of there, we saw some mold, and we felt really sick in that house.
Horrible.
For you were messed up all weekend, I remember.
Yeah.
It took me about an hour before I felt right after that one. So I think, and actually, tell me in your experience, how many times, because I know you've worked a lot with the health, kind of the mold sensitive, mold sick.
Mm-hmm.
I know you've worked with a lot of doctors and physicians who treat mold sick patients, and that's where you've got a lot of your expertise from as well. But how often have you seen someone sick in a home where the air test maybe didn't really reflect that very well?
I don't know if I could put a percentage on it, but it's a high percentage.
Pretty high?
It's a really high that because if two things are going on. One is if the mold is happy and not sporing, and when I say happy, it's getting plenty of moisture and food.
Mm-hmm.
So it's just growing. It's not in a state of stress, so it's not going to spore out, right?
Yeah.
That's the state of the mold that is the most dangerous, because that's the state that it is putting out mycotoxins.
Yeah.
And so it's really, really common to go into a home where somebody has more of the toxicity symptoms, like neurological problems and things like that, where the mold is happy in that home.
Yeah.
It's putting out mycotoxins like crazy, but you take a test and it is a relatively clean house spore-wise.
Yeah.
And so I would say easily 50% of the people I've treated, their homes that were really sick from mold and mold toxins, and they got better after we treated the home. I would say easily 50% of those, the pre-treatment tests showed no problems at all.
According to
the spore trap test.
Yeah, was that like according to like using outdoor as a baseline kind of a
or
concept?
Even just no, not even doing that. Just my experience is okay. That's an overall fairly low count. You don't have any marker molds that are showing up.
Yeah.
No stachybotrys, no chaetomium, and very, very few hyphal fragments. all things that you look at to determine if that's a problem home or not. I'd say easily 50% of the people who were sick, the indoor test didn't trigger any red flags.
Wow.
We just knew that, look, if I can smell it, you probably have an issue.
Yeah.
Or if your doctor says you've got mold problems, you have an issue, let's just treat it and get you feeling better.
Yeah.
So.
Wow. So not even using outdoor tests, because I feel like you, of anyone I've talked to in the industry, you have a much higher standard for indoor air quality than anyone I've talked to.
Yeah. I honestly, Jerry, I think outdoor tests are ridiculous.
I think people who've listened to this podcast, I feel like you put a jab in for that almost every podcast.
I do.
Just get a little.
I think spore trap tests in general are ridiculous, but
Yeah.
especially comparing outdoor to indoors, even that's a whole new level of nonsense.
Yeah. So even according to your kind of high standard, even with that high standard, you see quite a few that are still mold sick.
Right.
And they fall within your high standard.
Yeah.
Is what you're saying.
Right.
Wow.
Yeah.
And I guess we did do a podcast on all the things we look for in a mold inspection, but yeah, I mean that's kind of the importance of, like we've talked in a couple of podcasts, doing a full home inspection and incorporating all the factors of health symptoms as well as all the visual stuff,
Right.
as well as very thorough. Doing a profile of the home, a history of the home. Understanding what kind of water issues have happened there. The age of the home is really important. Take an air test, maybe some surface swabs, do some other, and you package it into this big picture, and that's going to be way more valuable than
just taking a test.
Just taking that air test. So,
Yeah.
I mean, we've said that probably dozens of times on this podcast, but one more won't hurt, right?
Never hurts.
All right. Well, I think that covers it pretty well, don't you?
Yeah,
for
I think
today,
so.
Mike?
Yeah.
That
was good stuff.
Yeah, that was good stuff. I hope
My daughter called at the end there, so I'll probably call her back.
Yeah, give her a call back. You have to report on it. You should have put her on the podcast.
I should have, yeah. I should have.
Next podcast.
Next podcast.
She's probably the caller. She was probably the caller calling in about, what we asked to debate,
Yes, the indoor
versus outdoor environments.
She probably has seen an outdoor environment indoors.
Indoors.
If anybody has, it would be Lindsay. Yeah.
All right. Well, thanks, guys. We'll talk to you next time.
Take care.
Later.
Thanks for listening to the Mold Matters podcast. Be sure to subscribe for more in-depth information on mold illness and recovery.